Amongst the countries of the world, many are burdened by their history. It constrains them and it compromises their ability or their capacity to act on the global stage. Israel aside, there is, however, one country which was born of optimism and whose optimism has been, for over 2 centuries, the locomotive for growth and a positive influence in the world. Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, was often visited by Israeli diplomats and politicians who were coming to America to negotiate with the US to seek support, seeking his counsel. He would often encourage them to make clear that the US should always act in its own self-interest and as a kindred spirit, not as a favour or charity to Israel. I think that there are 2 messages here. Firstly, that if Israel wants the US to respect its sovereignty, it must start by respecting the primacy of US sovereignty. And secondly, that Israel and the United States share a fundamental optimistic outlook to which I've referred. If we cast aside all the rhetoric and politics, of which there's plenty, the essence of the relationship between the United States and Israel is built on an optimistic worldview and a positive view about our future. In Israel, we sing Hatikva. In America, they sing of love and freedom and bravery in the face of adversity. Different settings, but similar sentiments. Senator Joseph Lieberman is the personification of this very idea. The way he lives his life and has done so over his 4 terms as a US Senator and through the many other things of which he has accomplished, he has had an illustrious career. He has served his country with distinction and lives his life both as a proud Jew and an unconditional supporter of the State of Israel, recognizing that these aspects of his life sit proudly and comfortably side by side without any need for compromise or tension. On his trip here for our UIA, his first since his retirement from the US Senate, he is accompanied by his wife Hadassah, a personality in her own right. Please welcome to the podium Senator Joseph Lieberman.
Well, good evening. Thank you, Shlomo. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Let me say first how happy I am to be here and how, along with you, honored I am to be in the presence of 2 genuine heroes, Gilad Shalit and Noam Gershoni, who you will hear from after dinner. I'm also happy to be here with my wife, Hadassah, and Shlomo chose his words very well. She is a personality in her own right. I have been, in my life, in many different ways, a very lucky individual, and in no way more so than in having Hadassah as my wife. I'll just tell you a quick story that in my last campaign, which was a tough one for the U.S. Senate in 2006, our slogan was, "I'm sticking with Joe." That was on bumper stickers, buttons, lawn signs, and one wise guy in my campaign made a special button for Hadassah that said, "I'm stuck with Joe." I'm glad she stuck with me, and I'm particularly happy that she's here with me tonight. It's a long way, as you know, from Connecticut to Australia. But after having spent 5 days here, Hadassah and I feel very strongly that it was really worth the trip. This is a beautiful country. We've been in Sydney and Melbourne, 2 beautiful cities. We're going on to Perth tomorrow. And I must tell you that you are part of one of the most impressive Jewish communities I have ever met. As you know, and I think Shlomo mentioned, 2 months ago I retired from the United States Senate, but I'm not retiring. I'm looking forward to a next chapter in my career in the spirit of a wonderful story I heard recently about a new rabbi in a community who decided to visit the Jewish residents of a nursing home. And he went into one room with a Jewish man, had a good conversation with him. At the end said, "Sir, if you don't mind my asking, how old are you?" And the man said, "I'm 80. And of course, remembering our tradition that we hope everyone will live to Moses' age of 120, The rabbi said, "May you live another 40 years." Went on to another room, met a woman, another good conversation, a little older. He said, "Ma'am, how old are you?" And she said, "I'm 100. And he said, "With God's help, may you live another 20 years. Down the hall to the final Jewish resident of the home, man in a wheelchair, but still alert, talking. At the end, the rabbi said, "If you don't mind, sir, how old are you?" And the man said, "Rabbi, believe it or not, this is my 120th birthday." And the rabbi said, "Have a great day." So I'm looking forward to a lot of great days. And this is one, being with you tonight. I want to talk to you about miracles tonight. And if you'll allow me one more story. I believe in miracles, and I bet that a lot of you do too. But for the skeptics here, I share a story that somebody told me after I was elected to the Senate in an upset told to me by a gentleman who supported my opponent to try to explain why. So he said there was a story he'd heard about a little boy pulling a wagon along a sidewalk, and the wheels fell off. And the little boy said, "I'll be damned." He put the wheels back on the wagon, pulled it a little further. Again, the wheels fell off. This time he shouted out even louder, "I'll be damned." And as I was told this story, his minister came by at that moment and said, "Son, when something bad happens to you, you should not swear. You should affirm your faith in God." So the little boy put the wheels back on the wagon, pulled it a little further. Again, the wheels fell off, remembering his minister right there, what he had been told. This time he shouted out, "Praise the Lord." And the wheels jumped up off the sidewalk and reattached themselves to the wagon. And the minister said, "I'll be damned." So I believe we are alive in an age of miracles. Miracles in medicine and pharmaceutical sciences that are enabling people to live so much longer. Economic miracles that have raised hundreds of millions of people, particularly here in the Asia Pacific, out of poverty. And of course, information technology miracles that enable us to communicate, to educate, and to recreate in ways that were unimaginable not so long ago. I'm old enough to remember a time when a BlackBerry was just a fruit, and tweeting was something only birds did. I have seen miraculous changes in my lifetime, so rapid and large that I fear that younger people will take these miracles for granted. I have the same concerns about the Jewish world, where we have also experienced enormous miracles in our time. I personally believe that we are living in one of the greatest periods in Jewish history because of two great miracles. The first is obviously the reestablishment of the Jewish state of Israel in its historic homeland. And the second is the unprecedented opportunity, freedom, and success enjoyed by Jews in the superpower of the world, the United States, but also in other great democracies like Australia. And here, if I may, I want to be personal. The opportunities that I have enjoyed in American political life would have been hard to imagine a generation or two ago. My parents raised me to believe that to be successful in America, I didn't have to hide who I was or what I believed. And it turned out that they were right. I was elected a state senator, Attorney General of Connecticut, United States Senator, and in 2000 was honored to be the first Jewish American nominated for national office, which is to say Vice President of the United States. And all that happened to me as a proudly identified and religiously observant Jew. In 2000, on the eve of the day in which Vice President Gore was going to announce my selection, he invited my family and me to join his family and him at a private dinner in Nashville, Tennessee. And I want to just tell you a few stories from that night, which I hope make my point that we are living in unprecedented times of opportunity. I cannot resist first telling you that my then 85-year-old mother came to Nashville with us. She had trouble with arthritis. She had a walker. She was short. I will never forget her walking into the room, looking up at Vice President Gore and saying, "Mr. Vice President, you made the right choice." I'll digress from that night for a moment to tell you that a week later, in Los Angeles, on the night that I accepted the Democratic nomination, our family experienced what seemed like a dream, my mother was interviewed by Larry King. They got on so well that I worried that Larry was going to try to make her his 9th wife. But at one point in the conversation, Larry says to Mom, "Mrs. Lieberman, what do you say to your son when he makes a mistake?" And my mother, without hesitating, said, "Mistake?" Okay. So here, going back to my point about miracles and change, Al Gore pulled me aside that evening and said, "I want you to know that I decided that I wanted you to be my running mate. But before I made the final decision, I spoke to a small number of friends, both Christians and Jews, about whether America was ready for a Jewish person in the second highest office in our land, a so-called heartbeat away from the presidency. And what I concluded was that the fear of anti-Semitism, Gore said, among Jews was much greater than the reality of anti-Semitism among Christians. In other words, the Jews Al Gore spoke to were nervous, understandably from our history. The Christians said to him, "It's no problem." And so, as he said, I went ahead and made the choice I wanted to make. It's a remarkable change, and the confidence that he had in the American people was validated during the campaign. The second thing I want to tell you about is that Hadassah asked at one point in the dinner if she could make a toast. Hadassah is the child of survivors of the Holocaust. Her mother came through Auschwitz and Dachau. Her father was in the Hungarian labor camps. They both went separately to Prague, where they met and married, and Hadassah was born there in Prague. And she said in her toast, "Mr. Vice President, I want to thank you as the child of survivors. The fact that my family has come from the horrors of the Holocaust in one generation in this country to a point where my husband has been nominated for the second highest office in the land is a miracle, and it's happened because of you, and I toast you." Afterward, Vice President Gore went over to Hadassah and said, "Hadassah, I was so moved by your toast. I want to ask you, after I make the announcement that I've selected Joe, if you would introduce him and speak from your heart as you did tonight." And she got up there before the whole country, in some sense before the whole world, and said she was there as the proud wife of Joe Lieberman. But she felt in a very real sense that she was there representing the souls, and she used the word neshamas, of the 6 million who had been lost in the Shoah. The reaction, I thought, of the American people was so positive, so strong. For so many years, I think the truth of the horrors of the Holocaust people turned away from. They embraced Hadassah, they embraced her. Throughout the campaign, we kept meeting soldiers, veterans of World War II who spoke about how proud they were that they were part of defeating the Nazis, and immigrants from all around the world who said they identified with her as an immigrant. Those are some of our stories which I think illustrate what an unprecedented time of opportunity this is, not at every place in the world for Jews, of course, but particularly in some of the great democracies. Most of you in this room could share similar personal stories, I'm sure. Immigrants to this new land, many of you survivors of the Holocaust or children of survivors, who thanks to your own abilities and hard work and the openness and fairness of Australian society and the Australian people have achieved extraordinary success, becoming devoted and leading citizens of this country while remaining proudly identified as Jews and strongly supportive of Israel. These are in their way, each story that you're part of, miraculous stories which should never be taken for granted. I believe that no Jews have ever lived as freely as we have been able to live in the two countries that we're blessed to be citizens of. We have been strengthened by the existence of the State of Israel, but the freedom that we enjoy in our countries also enables us to contribute so much to the growth of that other miracle, which is Israel's rebirth in 1948. Of course, that story began long before in Genesis, when God told Abraham to go to the land of Israel, promised to make him a great nation, and promised that that nation would exist as long as the heavens remain above the earth. But tragically, for most of the last 2,000 years, the Jewish people were largely separated from their land, and no Jewish state existed. Generation after generation of Jews, through very difficult, sometimes horrific experiences, yearned for and prayed for the reestablishment of the State of Israel. But the miracle occurred in our time, and it occurred when the modern Zionist movement began in the late 19th century. David Ben-Gurion once famously said, "In Israel, if you don't believe in miracles, you are not a realist." I agree. The dictionary actually defines a miracle as an extraordinary event that manifests divine intervention in human affairs. Again, I agree. But you and I also know that the miracle of Israel's rebirth was accomplished here on earth by flesh and blood women and men, like Herzl and Jabotinsky, Weizmann, Ben-Gurion, and Golda Meir, and so many others, who acted and led with the support of Christian political leaders like Balfour and Churchill and Truman and so many others. And here's the important point I want to make tonight. The miracle of Israel's existence will only be continued if flesh and blood men and women like you and me continue to support Israel. The fact that you're here tonight tells me that you understand that. And the fact also is that the record of the UIA of Australia in supporting Israel's growth, and particularly the absorption of successive waves of immigrants, has been extremely impressive, consequential, and really stands out across the world. That support urgently needs to continue for Israel, because in my opinion, for Israel, these are in some ways the worst of times, even though in other ways they are the best of times. The best of times because Israel's growing and remarkably diverse population, its innovative and successful economy, its world-class military and intelligence forces, and its rich and creative culture. But it's also the worst of times for a single reason, and that is the Islamic Republic of Iran, which regularly threatens Israel's existence, materially supports the anti-Israel terrorist groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, and is working feverishly to develop a nuclear weapon which would be the gravest actual threat to Israel's existence since the creation of the state in 1948. A nuclear Iran would endanger not just Israel, but also its Arab neighbors, the US and Europe, and eventually most of the rest of the world. Hadassah will tell you that I am an optimist by nature, but when it comes to Iran, I'm a pessimist because I am a realist. I listen to what the leaders of Iran say. I watch what they do. And that's why I was so unsettled last week with the meeting of the so-called P5, the permanent 5 members of the United Nations Security Council plus Germany with Iran. It ended with Iran claiming progress, with the P5 plus 1 weakening their position and the stage set for Iran to forestall further action against it while surging ahead with its nuclear weapons development. My friends, these talks, believe it or not, with Iran and the P5 plus 1 have been going on for 10 years. It's time for a decision. I hope I'm wrong, but I believe we have reached a point where the Iranian regime is giving the rest of the world just 2 options: accepting a nuclear Iran or taking military action to stop Iran's nuclear program. And in that choice, in my opinion, there is only one responsible course for global security, and that is an international military strike to disable Iran's nuclear project that is led by the country with the world's strongest military, the United States of America. People ask me, is President Obama capable of ordering such a military action against Iran? My answer is yes, he definitely is. Will he? Of course I don't know. But what I do know is that a majority of members of both parties in Congress would support such a presidential decision, and so too would a strong majority of the American people with extremely strong support from the millions of Christian Zionists in America. One of my dear friends who's a leader of the Christian Zionist movement in America loves to tease me that there are millions more Christian Zionists in America than there are Jewish Zionists. And he's right, thank God. Bottom line, my friends, the miracle of Israel's existence is in danger today. And that's where you and I come in. It's up to our generation, each of us now, to sustain the miracle. Some of you may wonder naturally what we as individuals can possibly do to influence the enormous geopolitical trends and forces that I've described. So I offer first a response from the great anthropologist Margaret Mead, who said, "Never underestimate the capacity of a small group of committed individuals to change the world." And we have that capacity. Our own tradition says it differently in the rabbinic wisdom that when we get to the next world, the gates to the next world, we're not going to be asked why we didn't do as much as Moses did. We're going to be asked whether we did as much as each of us could have done. Chief Rabbi Sachs of the United Kingdom had a brilliant insight into the leadership of the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory when he said that the Rebbe was not so much focused on making more and more followers as he was focused on making more and more leaders. Each of us has the capacity to be a leader. Let me suggest quickly 4 things I think we can all do. The first is we need to do everything we can to make sure that our children and grandchildren, starting at home, don't take the miracle of Israel's existence for granted. Because unless they value it, they will not protect it. Miracles don't automatically last forever. They require constant nurturing and support. Secondly, we can, in great democracies and important countries like the U.S. and Israel, continue to encourage and support political leaders who will support Israel and also will support strong action against Iran. Third, we can strengthen the bridges that in their own miraculous way have been built in our time between Christians and Jews in support of Israel and in support of the freedom, unprecedented freedom that we've enjoyed in our great democracies. And fourth, you can continue to support the UIA because its work is so important to the continued vitality and existence of Israel. Tonight, as I said at the beginning, we are in the presence of two young Israeli heroes. Everyone knows Gilad Shalit's story. And I think all of us, in a way that perhaps Gilad is beginning to understand, over the years in which he was being held captive, came to feel that he was our son, our brother. And in a real way, he is. His fortitude, his spirit is an inspiration to all of us. And I was thinking as I looked at the video when it said Gilad is home. Gilad, the fact is that wherever you go in the world for the rest of your life where there are Jews, you will be, as you are tonight in Melbourne, at home with your family. The second hero tonight is that you'll hear from after dinner is Noam Gershoni. Some of you know of him, some of you don't. His story is a remarkable story that he tells with humor and eloquence. It will inspire you as it has me. These two are the best of Israel. Their patriotism and heroism, I want to argue, should remind each of us not only of the greatness that is in the Jewish people, but of the greatness that is in each of us. Because surely these two young men, notwithstanding all the training that they received from the IDF, could not have imagined the circumstances they were put in by fate. And yet they found, each in their own way, remarkable strength to deal with those challenges. Their courage should inspire each of us to believe that we're personally capable of making an enormous difference in the world and for Israel. And in a very personal way, as we think of our support for the UIA, when you think of their sacrifice, the least we can do is give as much as we possibly can. My friends, if I may close by paraphrasing Theodor Herzl, if we will it, if we work for it, if we support it generously, the Jewish state of Israel is no dream. It is a miracle that will live forever. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I could have sat there all night and listened to you, Joe. I have to tell you, I thought I was going to be introducing you this evening, so I left my office this afternoon at about 1 o'clock. And I thought I'd do some homework on you, so I did what everybody did, and I Googled you. That was at 1 o'clock. At 4 o'clock, after I was on page 27 of Google, I had to have a schluff. I was that exhausted. Can I say on behalf of everybody in the room, first of all, I just want to take you up on one thing. It's actually not that far to fly from the United States of America to Australia. It just depends on whether you're turning left or right on the plane. The reality is it's a real delight to have you here. I think everybody in the room, it's a great privilege to have a man that has committed so much of your life to public service, and certainly you've made your mark on the world, and you've also made your mark on Google. As a result of you travelling all of this way, we have a gift for you. For travelling all of the way from the United States of America to Australia, we've got a UIA tea towel for you.
and I'm sure it'll take pride of place in the Duss's kitchen.
Very good. We'll use it proudly. Thank you. Well done.